guys for coming back just to sort of tie up some loose ends. Our goal is to sort of get through all of that kind of clean up questions and follow up tonight so that we can begin our process of starting to deliberate and vote, hopefully starting next week, maybe trickling into the following week. But the goal of being ahead of where advisory and select board need us in terms of our votes done so that they can move forward and we can do joint meetings with them. So that's sort of the goal. So I know you guys have got a very busy calendar right now between negotiations and budget and just the season. I thought maybe what we could do is just tick off some of the quick, easy follow-up up front and just sort of dispense with that. And then probably at least as I saw it, the more substantive follow-up was around the athletic vans. And so we'll save that and we'll sort of time bound that at the end. So I thought maybe we'd start just with roads and sidewalks. Superintendent Shannon, I know that there's an update from your end. There were 4 requests outstanding. One related to Deer Hill Osgood campus, one was a sidewalk extension, and then 2 others related to the CHS middle school campus in terms of paving and sidewalks. So I thought I'd have you just run through a quick update on kind of where those requests stand from the school side.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So after our last meeting, we went back and Sue and I met with Nick from facilities to really talk about what it would look like if we did a more substantial project at the Deer Hill Osgood campus to really address both the roads and sidewalks as we were looking to do, but also the sort of the parking situation as well. We talked a little bit about how it can be really tight when people are parked to even get up between the 2 schools. And so as we started having those conversations, realizing that it's obviously a bigger project than what we had anticipated when we put in the proposals. So what we really thought was that at this point, what we'd like to do is retract the roads and sidewalks proposals. And actually, the 3 of us, along with Brian Joyce, will start meeting in the spring to start to do a more complete and intentional plan for what that could look like at the Deer Hill Osgood campus, and come back next year with a more thoughtful plan for what that could be. And by then, we'll also have a better sense of where we stand with the MSBA in terms of the core program at the middle high school. So it just seems like a better timing for that type of a project.
Yeah, I mean, not only hopefully will you know about the core project for the middle high school, but will also know a better sense of the bill coming due for the Osgood roof and sort of what the immediate calls are going to be on the school facilities fund for that particular project. So that makes sense. Okay. So I guess that leaves one project sort of remaining, which is the sidewalk extension. It seems like I listened to the Concom debate last week. And it wasn't a debate, it was a discussion. The town brought forth a proposal basically asking whether they needed to go forward with a NOI, a notice of intent to operate in the under the wetlands bylaw. And it was a preliminary discussion, but the bottom line was that I think that they are going to require an NOI for that particular project, which just puts a little bit more complexity with permitting, but I think there was overall support for the project with COMCOM. There was some good debate around like even the town's proposal was a 4-foot sidewalk connecting into a 6-foot sidewalk. And their sort of feedback was, well, if we're going to do this and we're going to operate in the buffer zone anyway, let's make it 6-foot connecting into 6-foot. So it was a good conversation. It was a good preliminary conversation, but my takeaway was that it is going to be a project that requires incremental permitting costs for the wetlands. There'll be some, I think they called it administrative permits for stormwater. And then whatever additional costs come from the conditions that they apply. The sort of three conditions that they talked about were 6-foot sidewalk versus 4. They talked a little bit about rewilding some grass that could be instead of having it mowed grass in the buffer zone, have it a wild area. And then I think the only other condition that they were debating was permeable versus impermeable, which is something that they felt strongly about with Sawyer Street, which it does add incremental cost. So I think my takeaway was that they're amenable, but Brian Joyce has some work when he gets back from vacation to sort of cost out what the incremental permitting and what the incremental cost of the conditions are. So it's not a $50,000 project. I don't know what it is. It's 50,000 plus something at this point, sort of TBD. That was my take. So from a capital budget perspective, I think we need to sort of follow up with Brian Joyce so that we sort of know where that's headed from a cost perspective pretty quickly. And then obviously circle back with the schools if there needs to be a discussion about potentially splitting that between school stabilization and the capital stabilization fund, that sort of TBD. But I get that some of that'll come down to like what the total bill looks like. So, were there any questions from the rest of the committee on sort of roads and sidewalks, or does that all make sense relative to what we heard last time from the schools? Guess you have, that's clear.
Yeah, I think that
My only kind of
Yeah, Corey.
no, yeah, I was just going to say my just follow up with the schools is I do think that when a project kind of gets stuck, and you'll see this a bunch of times all over the place. When a project kind of gets stuck between, it's important that wherever the request is coming from, you continue to be available and push for it, because what may happen here is, again, there may be a revised number, or there are actions with Concom and with Brian's department and with the select board and Chris to be sure that this doesn't kind of get dropped. And it felt I got on during the just capital, like we obviously we can vote on things, we can approve them, we can but we really can't take a campaigning kind of aspect. So I'd be on that one because it's dropped if we're not paying attention. So but that's up to you guys if it's the level of priority. So
Corey,
Yeah.
you're breaking up a little bit there, but I think what I caught was that there needs to be some follow-up from the schools to indicate a level of interest and support of the project, which I think there is, but this is definitely one, given where we are in
just
the
keep
cycle, a little push goes a long way at this point in terms of getting it over the goal line for this fiscal cycle.
I think Corey is breaking up.
all day. I
seriously.
thought they.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I will mute myself and figure that.
Yeah, I will follow up with Brian and check in once
Okay.
he's back.
Awesome. Next up, in terms of just small follow-up, I saw and updated the committee about the public announcement system and the pricing there. When we had originally started talking about this with the schools, it was sort of combined, and I still view it as combined. It's like an administrative upgrade to cameras and public address systems. So although it's shown as two sort of items right now in our tracking spreadsheet, we have two different funding. It's the genesis was, let's update this all together. It's administrative, but at some level, there's also an important just sort of completing the security piece of it too. So the thought process was keeping those two together when we look at it from a total perspective between the 2 camera requests and the public announcement. It's a little under $100,000, but the I guess the update from the schools, if you don't mind, is kind of where things are coming in terms of the new quotes for public announcement system.
Yeah, so when we had come originally, Ron had only been able to give us estimates from his vendors, and he was able to actually get the quotes for us. So now we have the actual pricing for both of those. I'm just gonna pull them up here for a moment. So the one for Deer Hill would be $3,485, and the one for Osgood would be $2,759. And so I think the actual prices actually came in a little bit lower than the highest cost estimate that they had given us. So I think that was good news for us once we got the actual pricing.
Yep.
Right,
Okay.
it says it's for installation, labor, testing, it covers everything, that price? That's great.
Yep. High labor, material and testing. Yep.
Thank you.
We like under budget.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So I think that was the one sort of estimate that we had updated in terms of cost. And then sort of and we didn't have any follow-up in terms of cameras. So I think the next sort of follow-up item was around buses, and there were a couple questions that had come up. One was relative to the existing 8-bus fleet and sort of how the terminal payments. Susan, I think that was your question. Did you get a chance to review what Sue had sent over in terms of the contract language?
Yes, having the additional contract help, but just so everybody understands, what is happening there is, Dayco basically bought the risk, the back end risk in the lease. They've already purchased it from, well, they put the money aside. They have the right to the residual at that price. So they're basically kind of buying, the opportunity that those vehicles will be worth that or even more at the end of the lease so that they can then resell the buses. So from our standpoint, that's wonderful. But don't, you should look at section 2.2 because it does describe that we have to return the buses in the condition that we're required to return them under the lease, or we have to pay to bring them back into that condition or pay to replace them. So I just wanted everybody to understand that it doesn't mean it's absolute zero. It could be something different.
Yeah, if a bus takes a big dinger in the final year of the lease and we have to bring
Yeah.
it back up to that condition in order to return them, then.
Yeah, I didn't read all the return conditions, but I just want everybody to be aware of that, so there's no surprises.
Yeah.
So that was one question. The other question came up in a meeting with the select board about whether they have backup cameras, which we're pretty sure they must, but they asked us to confirm that that is in fact the case.
So each bus has 3 cameras.
Okay.
Okay, that's great,
awesome.
appreciate that. And then there was a question about sort of the fee structure for ridership. I had a copy of the preliminary presentation that you had made in terms of the proposals for a number of different revolving accounts, but one of them was transportation. So I just shared that with the committee. I don't know if there's any new updates. Obviously, it's all a work in progress, but there is discussion about raising fees and fee structure in order to help that transportation revolving account come back to a healthier state than it's been in. Is that correct?
That is correct. Tomorrow night. No.
Wednesday. Wednesday.
Monday. Wednesday night at school committee will be a full discussion on the bus fee, but transportation fee, but also all of our fees. And then there'll be votes on the fees and any potential increases at our March 19th meeting. So we don't have any updates on what that will look like at this point, but it is, I think, important to note that at this point in time, we are the second highest transportation fee in the South Shore area. So any transportation fee increase will put us at the highest transportation cost for a local school district.
Yep. I mean, and it looked like Hingham had just upped theirs and we're potentially talking about even going above where Hingham was at. So appreciate that fine line that you're trying to balance. And again, not really our purview, but again, part of the overall health of the transportation. And then there had been a follow-up question about the electric bus. And if you could just sort of summarize where we are, and we obviously know that the electric bus, it's being used routinely when it's healthy, which is hopefully more often than not. But it's obviously one that can't go out of the district, just given its limitations in terms of charging. So it's a core route only. The vendor has gone bankrupt, but we continue to accumulate the lease payments associated with it, not knowing if there is somebody that's going to take over that contract out of bankruptcy. And so that's sort of the status. Is there anything else to add there in terms of, obviously not our favorite bus, but like it's part of the fleet for now?
Yeah, I think you summed that up pretty well. It is one of our regular bus routes. It's used for one of our regular bus routes. Like, the question that was posed is what happens when that lease expires? Will we need to either get another electric bus or a diesel bus? And the answer is yes, we will need to replace that bus. I think if you asked any of us right now, we would vote for a diesel bus because we have so many issues with the electric. But I think that's a question we can tackle when the time comes. You have, there is someone who has taken over the work with the electric bus in the contract. However, they're hard to get a hold of and they're not super reliable when things go wrong.
Okay.
It's a pilot program that I'm not sure we want to repeat at this point.
Okay. So currently 8 going to 9 proposed diesel buses. And then when the electric lease ends, date I have in my notes somewhere, but after, I think it's still a couple of years away, reevaluate and potentially have a 10 diesel bus fleet instead of a 9+1 electric.
Right.
Okay. Awesome. And then I think there had been one smaller question about just the furniture and the furniture replacement in terms of like other options besides just new. I think this was actually born out of the pandemic, where a lot of businesses were sort of no longer going into the office. And so unfortunately, office furniture became quite plentiful on the secondary market. So just a question there as to whether that was something that was looked at or could be looked at.
Yeah, we can absolutely look at it. I think the one thing that we want to look really closely at is if any of those companies are on the state bid list, because if they're not, we would have to go through an RFP process to get competing quotes from the different companies. So that's
Okay.
something we'll look into, but I think that's a consideration that we have.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. So I think those are sort of like, unless my committee, unless we're missing anything, I think those were sort of the core questions, except for the questions are remaining around the athletic bands. Was there anything else outstanding besides athletic bands from people's recollection? Okay.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Can you promote Corey?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, we
He's
lost.
stuck, he's stuck in the side room.
He's stuck in the side room. Promote to panelist. That work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, my computer finally gave up the ghost on me. So I think I'm,
Oh, yeah, and I was ignoring you. See, I was being good. I had my phone face down.
it's better. It's better to be ignored. It's better for everybody.
So I think next up was athletic vans, and just I think we've got the schools for like another 15, 20 minutes. So I guess I'll hand it back to you, Sarah and Sue, just to sort of give an overview of the data that was sent over in terms of looking at both the fall and the spring, and just sort of what were the conclusions, or what did you guys observe from looking at that?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, just want to thank Steve Rotundi for doing a lot of work on this project in general, and then to provide a really comprehensive look at two of our seasons, our fall and our spring seasons, which are our busiest seasons. What was really interesting to me when he did this was how many games never even make it to a schedule for our sports teams because we don't have the availability in-house, or even when we look to other options, districts or rental agencies for buses, to provide the transportation that would be necessary. And so in my conversations with him, what was interesting was that an ideal schedule for JVs or freshman teams would have a better number of matches or games that he isn't able to do currently. And so really what he shared was that in the fall, there are more opportunities for athletic events because we have like the JV and the freshman volleyball teams. And we now have a JV golf team for the boys team. Those would be we would be able to actually schedule an additional 22, call them games or matches, depending on what sport you're looking at.
Exactly.
Well,
Competitions.
competitions versus an additional 9 in the spring, which I think is important because to me, that's providing more opportunity for our students to participate. And we are, we're asking them to pay the same fees as, varsity athletes. So giving them a similar number of competitions would be important. I think we also found that there are a decent number of events that we would be able to use supplemental vans for, or the vans for, instead of actually leasing out or renting buses. So in the fall, there would have been 11 events that we could have used the vans for instead of leasing buses. And in the spring of last year, the last year spring is last year because we haven't had this year's spring, just as a matter of fact. There would have been 5 times where we could have actually saved money by using our vans.
So you're
So,
saying they're not
can I-
athletic events, these are just general events, not necessarily athletic?
Oh, these are all athletics.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
calling them events because whether they're matches or games or, depending on the difference.
Okay.
But they're all sporting events.
So digging into all those numbers, Sarah, and I talked with Katie kind of back and forth about this a bit. There's days you're double counting, where like on 10-8, you've got 2 lines of being able to supplement the bus, and then a third line as a game that we missed, right? So we can't have like all 3 can't count on the same day, right? If we have 2 vans, and I'm not saying this is a fault of the vans or reason not to get the vans, but it just the numbers that you're going to be able to save they add up to too many days. So the question is, as a policy, will these vans go towards teams that are missing transportation, or are these vans going to primarily go to teams that you had to contract out, but instead you could use a van for that, right? You can't do both on a lot of these days. So what's the priority? Is it the equity side or is the operational side?
I think priority is going to be first to provide what we can with our in-house resources. And then on the days where we're not using the vans for in-house already scheduled games, we would, then there's an opportunity to add something to the schedule, we would do that.
And the numbers that Sarah was quoting in terms of sort of the JV freshmen, that's the pink and green coded ones, the scenario 6. And the 5 and 11 that Sarah was quoting is scenario 3, the yellow and green, which is what was currently an outsourced bus that we rented for, $800, $900, $1,000, depending on the length of the rental, that could have been satisfied by a van. And in many of those cases, if you're looking at sort of the yellow green in the fall, it's JV girls tennis. So it's half the tennis team that was put on a bus instead of the JV girls tennis team that could have fit on a van. I mean, there's obviously scenarios where you could take a larger team and pack them in to 2 vans, but that becomes untenable in sort of my mind in a lot of ways, especially with some that have big equipment that they're traveling with. But like when you're talking about, girls tennis, or in the fall, you're talking about, just the varsity cross country team, which is 12 people max. That's what you can race max on a varsity cross country team at most meets. So that was sort of the scenario. What Corey
Well,
was,
let me go ahead.
but what Corey was just articulating was take September 19th as an example.
Okay, so I was doing 10-8, but yeah, okay, September 19th, yeah.
September 19th, one of the green yellows was the varsity volleyball team that was serviced with a bus, but an outside vendor bus, but could have been serviced by a van. The same day, you have also varsity golf, which could be serviced by a van heading in a different direction. And then unfortunately, you'll have a third demand, which would have been a freshman field hockey game that never got scheduled. And so I think his question is like, if you had 2 vans, would you be continuing to support varsity volleyball and varsity golf, and unfortunately freshman field hockey would be left behind again. That's sort of it helps the problem, but it doesn't on some dates help all of the problem anymore.
Well, also just an understanding of, if someone's asking about, okay, what are these vans going to solve, right? It's always good to have like a clear answer. It's going to solve the teams that did not get a transportation, or is it going to take stress off of the transportation operating budget? That way fees don't have to be raised as much. Those are just questions that, again, get filtered to us as we, get up and recommend projects.
Yeah, I mean, even with this and raising fees, we're still gonna have more transportation costs than what we have, I think, budgeted for. But I think that's right now our priority, right, is to bring down some of the transportation fees or costs. And then where we can, it's providing additional sporting events for those freshman teams when possible.
So in this scenario, you'd expect to kind of take these two lines out, where we're spending more money on requests, and then, we'll always kind of have some teams that there won't be a solution for.
Yep.
Corey,
On that
if I could
one,
just chime in here, I think that we'll likely encounter situations where we are challenged regardless of whether or not we have the vans. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the way that we got to look at this, because we can get into that, like this is really getting into the weeds here with all the scheduling and what we've asked Steve to do. And frankly, even for someone that is a member of the school committee, this is a fairly head spinning spreadsheet. So
Right.
I think the way we got to look at this request is we have a transportation issue when it comes to athletics. And I would suggest sometimes even, we might be able to realize some savings in non-athletic issues. I know that Susan had raised that earlier, whether Superintendent Sham was talking about athletics or not, but there's also like, non-athletic programming that the vans might assist with. But I think the way that we got to approach this is, yes, there will continue to be challenges because the vans aren't buses, right? So they're not going to be able to accommodate, certain teams, regardless of whether they're available. But if we have them, we will confront fewer challenges. And so that is the basis of the request. I think that I don't think that there's any universe in which we're going to figure out a situation where we can completely justify the vans. We can tell someone that we will never encounter any challenges, and we are going to realize, complete.
Yeah, I mean, the
goodness.
hypotheticals we can skip. It was just a one question about where these are going to go. I think and we got that answer, right? It's going to, and there's going to be problems. So, when we talked earlier about what these are for, right? We have our answer, which is a simple question. So the second part is also, Craig, you just referenced it, which is outside of athletics. I do know that there's other groups in town that have morning or midday transportation needs. Are these going to be available for those as well throughout the school? So this is only capturing the afternoon.
This is only capturing after school. We definitely have use for it during the day. As a matter of fact, I got an email from Nicole Balashi today who said that they have need for a van a handful of times each year, and they've been able to use the van from Elder Affairs, which they are no longer going to be able to use. She caught wind that we were looking for vans and asked if they would be able to use them during the day on those occasions, to which I said, of course, because they're actually for our kids. So, I think if we get these vans, we are going to find that we use them far more than we anticipate, because right now we don't think about it all the time because we don't have them, but there are going to be more uses than we realize for them.
Okay, thank you.
And again, Craig, I appreciate your patience, but it's part of the process, and I am definitely a data-driven decision maker, and so I'm happy in a spreadsheet. And I think a lot of the folks on the committee are also, so we appreciate Steve's time in pulling this together, and it really did help me sort of quantify that, we are looking to not necessarily solve in the fall 60% that's still going to remain bus driven. But there is another 40% that, and maybe not all scenarios, but in many scenarios could be solved through athletic van transportation. I think the biggest question, and Ralph, I see your hand, that came up both amongst our committee and also was raised by the select board was drivers. And there's been an assumption here that the coaches are going to be willing and able, and particularly when it comes to third-party coaches who are often coming in from a second job, whether it's teaching or elsewhere, are they truly going to A, be able to make that commitment, and B, do it without additional compensation or training or whatever? So I think that's been an assumption, but I'd love to sort of hear how you guys have thought through that and whether you've had any specific conversations through the athletic director with coaches about that.
Yep. So, Steve has had conversations with the coaches. They are on board with it. You said there are a few new coaches that he hasn't touched base with, but the majority of coaches have already expressed that they'd be willing to drive the vans. And there's no additional license. It's really just, because I actually had to get approved to drive this type of a van in my last district. You really just have to get your driving record and show that, and then you get approved for driving these vans. And so our coaches are willing and able to do that. So there's no additional cost for them to be able to do it. And there's no additional cost for them to drive, because they'd be going and they're already getting paid to go to these games as it is.
Okay. Ralph, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, my question is really much more broadly, is there any limiting principle with regard to the proliferation of teams and sports? And let me tell you the way I look at this. We have added a great many different teams in sports over the years as I've been on various committees. And each time it requires more money being spent, whether it's coaches, assistant coaches, vans, costs, and so on. And there seems to be no limiting principle. I'll bring you some thoughts. I can imagine that pickleball will come up one of these days, or maybe rugby will come up one of these days, or maybe paddle tennis, or maybe squash. And as a result, allowing yourself lots of room in this that allows for lots more teams. And it's not to say that we shouldn't be supporting athletics for kids. You have to have some principle by which you say, when is it appropriate to add these things in? When in fact the school is already pressed for finances and we're pretty well tapped out for capital budget committee money. So I am really quite concerned about the proliferation and the addition of vehicles throughout our entire town. Now we're talking 2 vans, we've got 2 buses now, which we would not have had before, and a lot of things have changed, including in every department. And so the real problem for me with additional vans now is there's no limiting principle to the number of different sports we could support, and that there would be adequate numbers of people for. I don't know how you answer that, but it does require some kind of limiting principle or some principle by which we in fact decide when do we add these things, and whether we have even now, are they appropriate things for us, a lot of us who wonder whether or not all these sports are things that the town should support, or whether they truly should be supported by the individual families and students who actually participate. So anyway, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, so I think a couple things. First of all, I do think that sports are good for our students. It gives them different outlets and different ways to express themselves. And we do have a process through which new sports are added. There has to be enough interest. So for instance, we just added girls volleyball. Adding that sport allowed 80 students to participate. That's a huge number of students who are interested in a sport. When we have numbers like that, then there is a process whereby they have to be a club sport first. They have to be self-funded for a period of time. And then once they prove that they are a sustainable sport, then it becomes a district funded sport. So I think that helps with that process that you're talking about, because if through those self-sustaining years, they can't sustain themselves and the numbers aren't there, then the district makes a decision potentially to not move them forward and sustain them through the operating budget. And I don't know that we've had a whole lot of sports other than, I'm trying to think, even in recent years, it's really just been girls volleyball that I can think of that's been added in at least the last 6 years that I am aware of. I'd have to go back and look beyond that to see if we've added any other sports. But I know that in the last 6 years, it's just been girls volleyball that's been added.
Yeah, no, volleyball is the one that comes to mind for me, just because it was coming on as a club when I was leaving school committee back in 2018. So they were a club for a number of years before they were promoted to varsity, and then now they support
Yeah.
2 JV teams, or JV and a freshman team.
Yeah, maybe we haven't added new sports, but we've added in some occasions like a freshman team, because there's been such a number of kids wanting to play. Or we've had sports that were joint with other school districts, like cross country, for example, and now we have them. And I'm a total proponent for sports, but that's just my recollection from the years that I had kids in the school and beyond.
Yeah. I think that trend that you just mentioned, Susan, the bigger one of like it was a joint team and it no longer is joint, that has happened to us. I think cross country is an example, and hockey perhaps, is that right? Or hockey still with
Girls
Hanover?
hockey, yeah.
Hanover. Gymnastics is still with Norwell. But I do think softball became independent maybe 1 or 2 years ago. But I know that we still have hockey and gymnastics are still combined. And track recently split as well.
Yeah.
Our own track team. So I do think that when we have the Cohasset population becomes big enough to sustain our own team, that is when they make that split.
Yep.
Can you remind me again about the cost I see that there's two numbers. There's a number for 115 passenger van at 89,350. And then there's a number for a lease scenario. Which scenario, can you remind me, are we focusing on?
We're
Yeah.
focusing on the lease, I believe, but
And we did ask, by the way, about the potential for a 1-year lease, and Sue can talk to the numbers about that in a minute. But what we have found with the folks, and she's called around to a few, to do a 1-year lease ends up actually being more expensive because nobody wants to do a 1-year lease. So they increase the price and increase the, interest rates.
That's correct.
okay.
Okay, so we're looking at.
Can we follow, I mean,
So,
but
so I'm sorry, Corey, I think we need to, Susan's question around the cost of the lease is still open.
yeah, no, I'm just gonna follow up on that, yeah.
So is that the 33,690?
Sue, do you have that?
That's for two vans.
That's for 2 vans per year for 5 years?
Yes.
Okay.
So it sounds like, Sue, did you get a number for a 1 year? It sounds like it was cost prohibitive, but I'm just curious.
I am waiting, to hear back. But that is what the vendor said. To get a finance company that will do it for 1 year is difficult, and we're gonna pay, a good percentage higher than what a 2, 3, 4, 5-year lease would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
1 year is just not palatable to them.
Did you inquire about any kind of mileage restriction on a lease?
No.
Yeah, I mean, vehicles, companies lease vehicles for 1 year or 2 years all the time. So I'm really surprised you got pushed back. And a 4-year lease is kind of a long period for a van, right? You typically, the 24 or 36-month leases are kind of the norm when it comes to what we talked about with the dealers when it came to the even the senior center. So it's just kind of odd that they're pushing it to such a long lease period. Again, because the lease period, when you lease something, you're paying down the depreciation. So depreciation over 1 year shouldn't be enormous. And even if the interest rate was high, it's only 1 year of interest. So it's not like you're getting whacked with amortization schedule over 4 years.
Right.
So
Corey,
yeah, go ahead.
Corey, would you just like us to get I'll just get one. We need to get you. The
Just
figures
send us what they. Yeah, please just send us what they.
Let's
Yeah.
just do that. I'll just get you. We'll
That's
just get you the 1, 2,
Yes.
and 3.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I've already
Take care of
asked,
that.
I've already asked for those prices. I just haven't received them back.
We'll just follow up on it. We'll follow up, Susan. I'll help you out. We'll get it. It's not hard.
Yeah.
We'll get it from them, and then because everyone's wondering, and we're talking about something we don't know. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I still
So
think that
Craig,
if
is it
we
like a term sheet that would, have the price, but also mention a little bit like the structure of the lease, so we know what we're dealing with?
like we have for the buses, yeah.
Like we did with the
sure,
bus.
yeah. If you'd like that, we'll
would be very
request that.
helpful.
Sure.
That'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the mileage restriction is a good one, Susan, just because these are going to be doing some potentially longer haul and high frequency. I mean, in a weird way, our core routes are sort of very predictable. Our athletics actually are higher mileage and unpredictable in terms of scheduling. So that would be a good one to know what we might potentially trip over. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and that's part of the discussion about having a shorter lease term, right? If we find that we're using these 20,000 miles a year, right? I mean, that's, if we're locked into 48 months, we're stuck with that scenario where we're now limiting them, right? So that's kind of why having a shorter lease term where we can figure out how well these work. If they work phenomenally, then maybe we buy them, right? And because we're putting so many miles on them. So that's, buying us flexibility has real operational benefits.
Great.
Absolutely. Get all the information for you.
Okay.
All
Perfect.
right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm sort of looking at the clock right now and wondering if there's any other questions. 'Cause I think the big follow-up on this one is really the lease terms, sort of the suite plus the some of the key term sheet terms that would come with a 1, 2, 3 year lease. Is there anything else from the committee? Ralph, you posed a good question.
No, I don't think so. I am concerned though that I don't need to repeat what I said, only that, a lot of people, including people my age and who've been around a long time, know that this is a proliferation. I know you don't think it is, but we know it is from at least our times. I've been in this town a long time. And that there is and I understand the limiting principle, which you have mentioned, that is participation. and how it has to at least emerge initially from a few years of trial. But we're adding things, and we're adding things that in fact cost money, and that in fact we can hardly afford what we've got now. We've got $1 million deficit here and there, and we're talking about now adding things. So I would say be very cautious about what you add. Long term, these become expenses which we never ever are able to divest ourselves of. So that's the real problem here.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, so, if it's possible to get quicker rather than a longer turnaround, just because we are sort of trying to wrap some of this up, we'll leave it with in your guys' capable hands to get back to us in terms of term sheets, but, that would be helpful as we start deliberating next week and hopefully taking votes thereafter, so.
Yeah, Katie, it's a
Absolutely.
busy week for us, but I think we can commit to week's end having that information in your hands.
Okay,
Great.
no, that's great, and just keep us
Right.
posted, we can, as long as we know what we're dealing with in terms of timing, it's just helpful, so, either way, just touch base at the end of the week.
Yeah,
Certainly.
We
I mean, when the
appreciate everyone's
question-
collaboration and everyone's support as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like when the question came up last week, follow-up questions about, can we pilot it? What would 1 year look like? I reached out to the vendors and they just have not had time to get back to me.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, thank you. I think that's it. Good luck with the rest of your meetings, back to back to back. And we will be meeting on the 10th and the 17th, and then thereafter with advisory and select board.
All right. Well, we
Thank-
appreciate
Great.
your time.
Thank you so much. Yes, we appreciate all the work, the collaboration with Corey and Katie. I think it really did expedite the process.
Mhm. Yes,
Good. Glad, happy
Thanks
to.
very much.
thank you for all your hard work. We'll
All right,
you.
thanks, guys.
see you in term sheets. Thank you.
John is in the audience. So, sorry, Chief Dockery. My apologies, John. My apologies, Chief. There we go. I'll get it right the fourth time here. I can't promote him. I'm no longer a co-host.
I think I got it. I'll try again. There we go. Hey, Chief Dockery. Oh.
Hello, everyone can hear me now?
Hi.
Sure can.
Hello,
We gotcha.
Corey, no offense taken.
I can't get to the second. It was John and then something else, and I checked out. I've got a very
That's all
short
right.
attention.
That's all right. That's all right.
All right.
So
Thanks
y-
for providing the rolling stock, Chief. That was very helpful.
You're welcome.
So I think there were some questions about the ambulance. I think Ralph, you had some comments on the ambulance and the amount of mileage. Did you want to
Yeah.
conversation?
I would. Chief, I think, let me start out by saying I certainly can appreciate the desire to have the most up-to-date equipment and also equipment that works when necessary. Obviously, that's a major function of the fire department, and I've actually had an occasion to use it, so I understand its importance to the community and importance to individuals in the town. So there's no question what I think about it. What I'm concerned about, though, is we have a vehicle with what, roughly 55,000 miles. I guess the latest chart here you've sent to us, thank you, has the current vehicle about 55,000 miles, I think, and it's probably about 4 years old, something like that.
Correct.
And we think that probably within, if we can buy one, we will have one in 3 years. So we will have a vehicle which will be 7 years old that will retire and probably approximately 100,000 miles. It just seemed to me that in fact, that seems like a very short life for our current relatively new vehicle, because it will be 6 or 7 years old at that point, and probably about 100,000 miles, not more than that. And it makes me wonder, why would we actually retire something like that, which is fully equipped with all the life-saving equipment, and then just put it under a canopy or in a building, and just leave it for the occasional once a year, 6 month period, which is what you talked about before, for a 6-week period, maybe using that as the alternative van while the current van is being repaired or maintained or whatever happens to it. So the first thing I say is, it seems early to actually retire a vehicle with just that little mileage and with that really short life. And number two, the 500,000, which is the number you have quoted, I think, is approximately twice what we had paid only, 4 years ago for a similar van. And so the question really is, because it certainly has nothing to do with the cost of materials. There's no sign whatever in the entire automobile industry that anything like a doubling has occurred in 4 years on almost anything, unless electric vehicles are you're thinking about. So there has to be some explanation for a $500,000 vehicle, which is twice as much as we paid only 4 years ago. So those are the two things that I say make me wonder whether we shouldn't at least extend a year or two before we start buying things, certainly to see where prices are going to go, and rather than retire vehicles, which are in fact rather in good condition even now. So anyway, those are the things I had in my mind.
Okay, so we don't really retire the vehicle, like we have a rolling inventory. So the first couple of years, the first 5 to 6 years, it becomes a frontline vehicle and serves the community. And we'll probably get, if it's 5 to 6 years out of it, we'll get 100 to 120,000 miles on it. And then the next 5 to 6 years, it goes into reserve status and backs up the primary ambulance, and then also gets used when we have events in town. And if we have to, we can staff it if we need to, if the other one goes down. So what happens is, when we bring in this new ambulance, it'll be the front line. It'll run 5 to 6 years. We'll put 100,000 miles on it, maybe 120, and then it goes in reserve. This one right now, it's let's see, 14. So it's got 11 years of service. It's got 150,000 miles on it. We'll probably, wait. If we have to wait 36 months, we'll wait 3 years, and we'll probably put another 20 to 30,000 miles on it during its 3 years. So then it will be at about 180,000 miles. And we've gotten pretty good service life out of it. So that's what we're doing, is kind of just rotating how we use our apparatus. A 5 to 6 year lead time in the front, and then another 5 to 6 years as a reserve for the community. So, and regarding prices, because they're specialized vehicles, cab and chassis are from one of the major manufacturers, then it has to go to a specialty vehicle place and then get outfitted. It's all electronics, it's storage, we have lift systems in it. And so these are just additional costs, and it's across the board. You speak to other fire departments, ambulance buyers, that's the going rate is $500,000. And
Yeah, there's a Wall Street Journal article about this, about just the past 4 or 5 years in just really in the whole specialty vehicle marketplace.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's questions about competition and all those kind of things, but to your point, what are we going to do? Buy a Honda Civic, right? I mean, there's kind of another thing.
Right.
And the other column you had, John, and this is being in the industry, you've got mileage, but you also have engine hours, right? And if you just take the average miles per hour on these, like the ambulance is like under 20 miles an hour. So one thing which I have in my head is, like, how often do we service these things, right? We're not servicing them every 10,000 miles. We're serving them every X number of hours, which may be, every other week? I mean, that's really kind of determination of how much wear the engine is getting.
Right, because the other thing too is we could go to a building fire tonight and we'll be there for 3 or 4 hours, and the ambulance will sit there and idle. So, we may have went 5 miles, 6 miles to the scene, but it sat and idle for 3 to 4 hours. So there's times it's not just the mileage. You're right, Corey, it is the engine hours, because there are times we could be on scene for an hour or two in the vehicles in idling mode.
But it's still incurring wear because the engine is on, essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we did about 810 transports last year. But the ambulance goes to everything. It goes to building fires, fire alarms, car accidents. We don't transport people, slip and fall.
Transformer fires.
Yeah. Car fires. It's like a primary piece of apparatus along with the fire engine going to all our primary calls. So it gets wear and tear across the board, day in and day out.
Do you remember, I know this is years ago, right? But when we retired, ambulance 2 now, because that's got 150 on it. So if we, following Ralph's math about if 1 is going to 2, 1's only going to have like 70 or 80,000 on it. If we go to, or let's say maybe 100,000, but ambulance 2 now has $150 on it. So was there some reason that got more mileage on it than before? That kind of stood out to me as, if we're not using it as much, I wouldn't expect to be that high.
We were delayed, so that did 7 years in the front because of COVID.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So it spent 7 years as a lead piece of apparatus and then went to secondary status.
Okay. Yeah, if that's 10 years old with 150,000 miles on it for an ambulance, that I feel like we're getting pretty good use out of that.
Yeah. And don't forget, we get inspected annually by OEMS, and they come in and they don't just count the bandages and the number of IV start kits and so forth. They go through the truck, they get underneath it, they check ball joints, they check wear and tear, they check tires, they even want the records, when was the last serviced and so forth. So, they're on top of it too. It's not just something because we had a problem years ago where we were running an ambulance for so long, OEMS came in and said, this is it. Your last year of using it. If we come back and see it here, it's off the road and you got to find a different way of transporting people.
One of the experiences that the school side had, and schools are just here, but years ago, and Katie was part of this, is at a certain point, like a school bus just gets too expensive to maintain. Is there a moment in time where in an ambulance's life where you're just throwing so much money into it that it doesn't make sense anymore? Or are you pretty happy with the maintenance costs running them, for 10 years effectively?
No, right now, a 10 to 12 year program, we're fine. It's, once we get past 12, because technology is changing, vehicles are changing, it's tough to find parts.
Right.
Because these are specialty vehicles. This vehicle was built in 2014. We're 11 years, try 12, try 15 years out. It's going to be difficult to get those parts because the manufacturers stopped manufacturing the parts for it because they've moved on to a different type of vehicles. So that's the other thing too, is chasing the parts. I have it right now. I have a problem with the 2010 fire engine. Chasing parts for it is nuts right now.
So Chief, in addition to parts, what kind of major maintenance have we done on the 2014 ambulance that we're looking to replace?
Well, right now, let's see, we had to do some front end work, and then right now it's waiting for a part for the rear lift system. So because when we go to take the stretcher out, the rear end has to come down to a certain height so we can take the stretcher out. And then once we put the stretcher in, the rear end has to lift up to a certain height so we can transport properly. And right now that generator that does the lifting and the lowering broke, and we're waiting on that part to come in so we can fix that.
But do you recollect any kind of like dollar figure you think we've thrown towards maintaining that ambulance over the 20-year period that we've had it?
Oh, we probably tires, front
I'd say
end.
10 years. I think
lifts.
the in-service date here is incorrect. So it's a 2014, so it's probably.
Yeah, it's 2014.
Yeah.
2014.
2014.
It's
we
not
probably-
2001, no.
Yeah, the 2021 is our front one. But
Yeah.
the 2014, the one I'm looking to replace.
Yep.
We probably put $30,000 or $40,000 worth of work into it.
Okay. in 10 years.
I mean, I guess this is a history question for you, Chief, but also the committee. I mean, it sounded to me when you first presented this that you were sort of following with sort of the historic precedent around, 5 to 6 years, frontline 5 to 6 years, ambulance 2. Has that changed or evolved over time, or is this sort of what we've been doing as a department for a while with capital budget?
It's what we've been doing for a while.
Okay.
Try to keep you on a schedule of 5 to 6 years. Obviously now, the COVID year kind of threw a wrench into things.
Mhm.
And not only just for us, but for also the manufacturers.
Yeah. And then the lead time increased from what was shorter
24
to
months, 24
Yeah.
months to 36 months, 2 to 3 years.
36 months. Okay. So now you're sort of thinking through that math also. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I had any other questions on my end. I thank you for the rolling stock. That was just for me as a new member, sort of super helpful to sort of wrap my head around, and certainly helpful to sort of see what is coming.
Mhm.
And there's some older vehicles sitting out there in the fleet.
Don't say their names. They'll break on us.
I
if you mention them.
will not say their
Right,
names.
some-
They will
don't-
not be named because they will not break if I don't say their name. But some of them have low mileage too, so that was my only other observation.
Yeah, so you mean they have low mileage, but they have high engine hours,
Yeah,
We don't travel much around town, what are we, like 6 to 8 miles, maybe 9 miles from a call here, but again, when they go out the door, they could be idling for a while at a scene. So,
okay.
and then if you saw like the rolling stock that's usually like an engine, we're about 24 to 25 years. Same thing the ladder truck, 24 to 25 years of service.
Yeah. Yeah, I also, there's a big stack of these coming due right now. That's sort of the other thing that I'm sort of looking at. Like if you push one, you push it into something else potentially, or squeeze it in between two things. So that's the
Yeah.
other sort of consideration.
I do recall we did put a lot of money into refurbishing, was it the Pierce engine?
We refurbished years ago. It was engine 1. It was a PS engine. That's no longer with us. We picked up the 2018. Our current engine 1. We traded that in. That was a 1994 unit. And then we did put some money into the ladder truck, refurbishing some undercarriage work on the ladder truck, and that was probably about 5 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I don't at this
No.
time.
Great. If you do have anything, feel free to reach out. Happy to provide any information you need.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
I see Dan Sullivan in the attendees. I don't see Chris. So I'm not sure that we've got Chris coming for DPW as promised.
Okay.
Do we want to just go through the stuff that they gave us, or do we want to wait for somebody to actually present it to us? Also, I mean, Dan is promote Dan, because Dan is the one who these quotes are going to. So
Mhm.
Okay. Just attempted it.
He declined to be promoted.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Um,
Guess we could review the materials if people
Yep.
think that's worthwhile.
yeah. I mean, the biggest observation I had was that, on the F-350, the crane lift was out of the quote, which is why it went from, over 100,000 down to that 111,000. I think it was much higher.
Mhm.
right, and the service lift went up too.
Yeah, the service lift went up, but I think that is installation, which is goodness.
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yeah, it looks like the
yeah, so the F-350 is now at 111,000. The F-600 is at 170, which is down a little bit, 5,000. The service lift is now at 66,604, and the John Deere tractor is down from what was, I think, kind of just a ballpark to 59,000.
So that's all great, but the question is, why did they decide to remove them?
What does this mean?
That's fine.
Exactly. Are we buying the right equipment for these numbers?
yeah 170,000 for a I guess it is an F600, but still, that's it's a lot of money.
I think I was more surprised at the F-350.
Yeah, that got expensive quickly too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what the question that we've been able to talk to a lot of people about is kind of the priorities of this. So I think until hopefully we get some guidance from, Brian or Chris on kind of what the priorities are, because I think, now that we kind of, it's projecting like we'll be in the range. And as I've been using the word small ball, like it depends on kind of how many of these little grounders we can include in the budget. So we can kind of do our normal course of order. And then, once we get some information from DPW, we can, fit in what's important to them with, what we have left if,
I think what we heard last time, and Ralph, I think we heard this both in our January meeting and we heard it from Brian when he came in. Number one is the lift.
yes, yep.
Deferred. And then basically 2, 3 were tied. The F-350 and the F-600 were sort of
Right.
tied at 2.
They're both rusty.
2.5,
Yep.
and then the trailing one was definitely the John Deere, but that is the oldest piece of equipment.
Okay.
If you didn't do it, if it broke, could you rent, could you do something until we got to the next cycle, is really the question. But yeah, is that your recollection, Ralph?
Yeah, that's right. I think that having looked at all that, I'd say that the John Deere, in spite of the fact it's fairly old, is in very good condition. We actually, I know you weren't with me, but I took a look at it. We kind of moved the hydraulic parts of it to see how much play there was in it, how about the joints associated with the hydraulics. And I didn't see a lot of play in it, so it's not as if this thing is worn out. In other words, I don't see the joints as worn out. I don't see the hydraulic as leaking at this stage. So it's one that you might actually say is still probably serviceable. It's certainly for another year for the use of it, which is generally to use to dig graves, as you know. So anyway, that's how I looked at it. I thought, and when you look at it, you'd say, that's a good looking piece of equipment. It's probably the best looking piece of equipment that you'll see in that garage.
It's the shiniest one in the garage.
That's for sure. Yeah. Well, some of the big, F 550, 650 trucks are in excellent condition, particularly the new ones, but also that John Deere is in great shape. So
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like we need somebody from DPW just to give us the thumbs up or thumbs down around these quotes and at least assure us that what they sent over is what they want.
Well, would we be comfortable with that? Communicated through an email throughout the week, or do we want them to come back and talk about it?
Not
Um,
overly complicated requests, right? We
Mhm.
understand
I'm used
the
to
need,
it.
we understand what we're buying. The prices, to Ralph's earlier point, everything's going up and that's, a pain. So I think until we do our deliberation, I don't have any further questions until we start really doing our math and seeing exactly where we end up.
I agree with Corey on that.
Yes, I feel the same.
okay. Yeah, okay. Well, and Brian's gonna have to come back to us anyway on the Sawyer's, or excuse me, I keep on saying Sawyer, the Pond Street sidewalk extension. So when we buttonhole him around that project, we can buttonhole him on the DPW quotes too. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Will he also be the one coming and talking to us about sewer or water, or is that the commissioners from sewer and water?
The commissioners.
Typically both, they
Yeah.
come hand in hand, yeah.
Yeah.
Brian's still the subject matter expert for, the membranes and stuff like that, so.
Yeah, I was just thinking. Okay. Okay.
All right,
Moves us
last
to-
thing we have is minutes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, we have 4 sets of minutes for review and vote tonight, 10/28, 11/4, February 10th, and February 24th. I just got in my inbox another 4 for our missing meetings in January and beginning of February. So next week we could review and vote those, and then we'll be basically current, which is a good thing. So that was, so 4 sets tonight, starting in sort of reverse chronological. We were missing the set from October 28th. So I broke out my notes, which always makes sense when you're taking them and make less sense when you're looking at them 3 months later. But I think I reconstructed the highlights of the conversation. My biggest deficit is I'm not great at, catching who seconded, and I had the votes, but I didn't have who seconded and who moved the motion. So if anybody has those details.
Not a huge problem. I mean, once we got through town meeting, our vote is really no longer applicable, frankly, right? We're an advisory vote once it gets
Yeah.
into the warrant, and then town meeting approves it.
Okay.
Kind of what we voted on doesn't really carry anything anymore. So,
Right.
Okay.
yeah. So the only kind of one tweak I had was just on the October 28th. You got an
Yeah.
extra A in MSBA. You've got Mazda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I searched that. I didn't find that again anywhere else. So
Okay.
that was the only little tweak.
That's me. So on the motions, maybe I'll just make the motions, that we moved, and then the votes, and I won't go through the who moved
Yeah.
it.
My notes don't say who moved them either.
Okay. And as Corey pointed out, it doesn't really matter. Okay. So, with the edit to the, MASB and,
MSBA.
My
She'll get
God.
that right.
I'm gonna write it on my hand. And the edits to the votes, can I get a vote to approve, the minutes from October 28th?
So moved.
Second.
Katie Dugan,
Sorry, who seconded it?
I did.
All right. We can just do all in favor, say aye.
all in favor? Aye.
I'm not sure that I was actually in that meeting, the 28th of October.
I have you there, but I have Ralph absent.
I cannot vote for that meeting, but
Yes.
Yeah, I was transitional, so I guess I was there.
Yeah,
As long as your body was there in some form, it counts.
right. So the vote is gonna be 4-0, Ralph, not voting because he was not at that meeting.
Mhm.
Correct, okay.
Yep.
The next set is, for November 4th, which we have previously reviewed. But we decided not to vote because we were sort of looking for the long rifle, which we found on the 28th. So there's
Correct.
no changes to these. It's just the ones that have been outstanding that we just need to vote. I think everybody was present except for Ralph, who you were still on your trip at that meeting. But otherwise, I was good with them as presented.
I move that we approve the minutes from November 4th.
So moved. Second.
Corey with the motion, Katie with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I,
All right, 4-0.
Mhm.
The next set is from, February, 10th. Ralph, this one, they had you listed as absent, but I had my notes that you were present for the February 10th meeting.
let me take a look, because I saw myself as absent too, so I didn't pay much attention. Let's see. Let's see
I'm
what
gonna
I'm
mark myself
reading.
to absent all over the
I'm
place.
reading it as we speak, okay?
It was for the DPW
Yeah,
presentation.
I'm reading it right now.
Yeah, okay.
I think, looking at this, I am almost positive I was there, okay? Because that I know, I remember all this discussion, certainly I was there, yep.
Okay,
So I will vote, well, when you get to a motion, I will vote on this one, yep.
yep. And I'll make sure we make the correction to show you as present.
Yep, yep.
I didn't have
Good.
any corrections besides members. Does anybody else have corrections?
1 second, I'm just looking at the video.
Well, that'll confirm
Yeah, exactly.
it.
That's me just looking bored. Second.
I'm the one with the rabbit ears, Corey.
Chris, I'm also listening to you on the video, so you just completely blew my mind. Like, which one is talking? Oh, here we go. Katie. Chris. Francine. Corey. Ralph, you weren't in the
I
roll
don't
call.
see you, Ralph, on my notes.
feel like he joined a couple minutes late, but
You might have come
I
in
think
late.
that
Okay.
what happened was in fact that I had, on that particular meeting, initially, could not get the video, and then when I rebooted, I could not get the sound, but I I participated vicariously in the whole
All right,
thing.
if you were there, well, you were there. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
there's no question.
Yep.
I was there. I think it was all a computer issue with me. So, yeah,
I
Gotcha.
think he missed
Okay.
the roll call at the beginning, but
yeah,
was
Yeah.
that's
there.
all it was.
um,
Yep.
Yeah,
Sweet.
okay.
Yep.
All right. So I'll make the correction to Ralph as present, but electronically tardy. And then, yeah. Any other edits? Are we good to go and vote on this?
I move that we approve the February 10th, 2025 minutes.
Second,
Second?
I'll second.
All right, Corey with the motion, Susan with the second. All those in favor, please say
Aye.
aye.
I,
Aye.
We got a full 5-0 because Ralph
Okay.
was there.
Bravo. And then the last set is for February 24th. The only correction I had was the third paragraph at the bottom of the first page. It's the first two sentences are talking about the historic section, but then the last two sentences actually apply to the historic building and the annex. So I was going to add a parenthetical for the historic building and the annex, comma, the building envelope would be secured with new windows and doors where needed. And then HVA deficiencies and ADA issues would be addressed and some framing, just to sort of clarify that the project does include work on the annex, but it relates to certain aspects.
I mean, you can, but it's pretty unnecessary. I mean, this whole thing could be summed up in 2 sentences. Because
Okay.
there really wasn't much, there wasn't like deliberation to capture. We were given a presentation.
Yeah.
And you know, that's kind of it. So, and that presentation is going to be given and is already public. So we kind of don't have to worry about recounting it. So while we can, it also, I don't think it matters at all what we do with these. So.
Okay.
That was a really long way of saying I don't care and it doesn't matter. So my apologies for wasting the electrons and the oxygen.
it's
But do I
okay.
get points for reading the minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, I will.
But you get an A for self-deprecation, Corey.
Okay, thank you. Then I will reluctantly move. I will move that we adopt Feb 24, 2025. Just as is. I'll just do that just to save your work, Katie, unless you really feel strongly about it.
I don't.
Okay.
A
Do you need a
second.
second? Okay, thank you. Corey with the motion, Katie with the second. All those in favor?
I,
Wonderful.
All right, 5-0 done. Okay. So I'll get the next 4 sets uploaded and send a link so people can look at those. And then Leontina sent me an email on the side just asking to coordinate. So with everybody, if everybody will deputize, I will make sure that she's got all the corrections and is then submitting them over to the town clerk, which is all we really care about in the end, is we get credit for our votes. So I'll coordinate it for the 4 that we just voted, and I'll coordinate it next week after we review the next and final set.
We have a new attendee, DPW staff Cohasset.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if we're gonna reopen that box, but
I'm okay for 5 to just close it out.
yeah, I can't promote, so
I'll
you'll
promote.
have to.
All right. Rejoining. Trying to promote. failing.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Work.
All right. We've got 2 people.
Hello, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I've been struggling for a while. I heard most of your meeting from
Okay.
John Dockery on.
Yep.
Okay, we worked through some of it. I don't know if you can reopen any of the issues that you had with some of the equipment, but I'd be more than happy to help you with any of the questions that you had.
Sure. I didn't catch who was speaking though.
This is Dan Sullivan from the
Okay.
DPW.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. No, I see, part of the problem is I see a Dan Sullivan box and I see a DPW staff Cohasset box, so thank you.
Dan,
Um,
I don't think we've met. Usually we obviously get, Brian's usually carrying all the different requests. So what's just give us a background. You manage the fleet?
I do most all the mechanic work on the fleet. I am the current I
That's
am
enough. Yeah.
the foreman over all the different departments, the general foreman. I have a pretty good knowledge of all of this stuff. I've done an awful lot of research with each one of these items.
okay.
Would you, we kind of recap what we had remembered about what Brian had told us for the priorities when it came to getting the lift done that had been pushed off a few times. And then if we get one or both of the F 350s or 500s, whatever they were. And then at the bottom, the cemetery backhoe, is that a proper prioritization? Again, if we start to having to lop things off. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
And of the 2 F trucks, it was, I think they're both kind of the same level of disrepair, but is one kind of more frontline necessary than the other? Just give us a little bit of context on that. Just, because we go through this with every request.
The 2 are pretty equal in they're both snow fighting, de-icing equipments. I guess the F600 is probably a little bit more of a priority than the 350 replacement because of the de-icing qualities that has. The utility body doesn't have a sander, but it does have a plow. The 350 is currently not running. That's why we're trying to push that a little bit. That went up the priority list, we'll say. But
okay, yeah, if it's no longer working,
not running is definitely a priority.
Years ago, I heard some of your interaction with John Dockery, and years ago that we were having trouble with that. We sent it out and we replaced the engine on it. I think at the time it was somewhere around $20,000, and that was 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And we are, like I said, it's currently not running. We sent it in and they repaired it once for $3,400, and we sent it back in because it had towed in, and their estimate on finding the problem was over $3,000. So I believe it's
is emission side stuff, Dan, with this? Because I know they're all
it basically it has a lot to do with the emissions. Yeah.
Okay.
At that old age vehicle in that kind of money, you got to start. Well, our feelings was it was wasting a lot of good money on a kind of a very old piece of equipment.
Yeah. And Brian said, I mean, the new trucks we're moving away from the diesels with the emission systems, and we're all getting,
That's correct.
The gasoline,
That's
Triton,
correct.
whatever's there. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, the V8's the 7. Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Yeah, that really puts it's just so expensive to maintain the emission systems, right? You're just, what used to be an engine swap and some repair. I mean, you've got DPFs that are thousands and thousands of dollars in pumps and heaters and all that stuff. It increased exponentially the cost of keeping these going.
the roll-off for the RTF, we recently, I'd say within a year, sent that out, and that was the tune of somewhere around $18,000 for the exhaust system to be
Wow.
updated. Yeah.
That's rough.
So that's one of the concerns about moving to gasoline powered equipment on the smaller vehicles anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Dan, one of the questions was, when we had seen the last quotes, when DPW was presenting on the F-350, I think there was a crane lift on there. Looks like that has been removed from the quote, so, part of the reason the price came down from the last version we've seen that, is that the configuration that the DPW.
That is accurate. That is accurate.
Okay.
Are we going to carry over the existing crane, or how are we going to deal with that?
Well, at the price, after looking at the price between the crane and outfitting the support system for the crane, I don't think it was necessary. We have equipment with chains and other things that we can manage to do the same task with, we'll say.
I think that was Ralph's point. Yep, when we first heard this was we probably have some other piece of equipment that can lift whatever we're lifting. So,
Right.
okay.
Okay. All right.
The automobile lift in question, the current one is 25 years old. They do not have once you lift it up, it engages a braking system, so it's a safety, so it doesn't come down. And they no longer currently have that system available for parts.
Is that system off, or are we just leaving stuff on hydraulics?
No, they're
Okay.
working, but there is a need for
We're already at the edge. Okay.
yeah, it's right on the edge. So
we pushed
in
this
order-
last year, Dan. Yeah, I mean, this was it was a need last year that we just couldn't fit in. So we really, when we came into it, we expected this to be the first thing, because it was just the thing that just didn't make the cut last year. So
right.
I think we're all on board with.
And part of that old lift is we cannot use the concrete that's underneath it. The lift company that's installing it is our lift inspectors. And the concrete that's underneath it with that lift doesn't conform to their specs on what would be the replacement lift. So as a result, we got to jackhammer out a small section of the floor, install reinforcement rods. I believe you may have a quote from, I believe, a mason.
We do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we got
that's
it.
that's what that entailed. You know, I just
Yeah.
wanted to.
$14,000 of concrete work. Yeah, plus 2,500 for removal. Right.
You're right.
Okay. Oh, is the 2,500 incremental number? So is it?
Meaning,
I'm sorry, this is, sorry, Dan. So there's 14,911 for the concrete work, and then there was a handwritten lift
Yes.
removal, 2,500, and then there's the cost of the lift itself for 51,000.
that 2475 or whatever the number was
Yep,
from the installer. I couldn't find his stuff through the emails that he quoted me, but I talked to him directly on the phone, and that was the price of removing the existing lift in order to jackhammer out the concrete.
So
okay.
we add that. That's not included in the 14 or the
That's
51
correct.
number. Okay,
That's-
good.
That's correct.
All right. Not good, but we understand. Okay.
Okay. I think when I was doing the total, so I'm off by 2,500 in terms of what I've captured in our spreadsheet, so I'll add in that 2,475 to our tally for tracking purposes.
Yeah, you're at 66. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's all I got.
Oh,
Yeah, and Dan, you heard the conversation around the John Deere.
yes. Yes,
so-
I did.
Any comments on, obviously a 2000 age equipment, but still functioning lighter?
Yes,
use?
we have done some repairs to that to keep the hydraulics not from leaking on the ground. We've repacked sails and whatnot. The pins, we've replaced some of the sloppiness that Ralph was talking about to try tighten things up. The hydraulic pump is getting weak as far as trying to lift full buckets up. It struggles a little bit. It's on the doorstep of being a problem. So like, I understand that the seats that you guys sit in, there's a lot of wants, but this will be coming up sooner than later. There isn't a replacement machine that it's in our possession. So if that does go down, we would probably have to rent something in the interim.
Okay,
So, you know, so
It's
Brian
it's really a specialized size that can maneuver inside the boundaries of the cemetery.
Okay.
So Brian had said that he thought it could last another year, but you're intimating that maybe it's less than that?
It may. It may, yes.
It's going to last until it doesn't. Yeah.
Right. We always, I don't know, I always try to scale out that it is starting to throw a lot of money, like the pump expense. I'm gonna just throw a ballpark with no background. This is just me guessing. It's probably a $4,000 item or something, and then if we do the work, there's some hoses. So it starts throwing quite a bit of money at an older machine, just to get by. So that's something that's really your department, not mine. I'm just trying to give you the honest impression of what I think of the tractor.
okay.
Mhm.
So if not this year, it'll be back next year with more urgency.
Yeah.
Yes, probably, yes.
Okay. All right. I think that's it from me.
I'm very glad I could get to talk to you. It was pretty frustrating on my end. Had 2 or 3 devices going, trying to contact you guys. But
Well,
I'm
I'm glad
glad,
you broke through. Like,
I'm glad we answered some of your questions anyway.
Yeah. We are
Yeah.
too. It's one last loop that we have to close, and I appreciate you coming on late at night, Dan.
No problem. Just like John said, if there's any other questions, feel free to just reach out, and I'll do the best I can to answer whatever questions you have.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks very much.
Okay,
All right,
thank
thanks.
you. Bye.
Okay.
I think
Closing.
we got a lot of our questions, you know, answered, or at least more information.
Yeah.
That will help form our decisions. It was
Yep.
a very productive
Yep.
meeting.
So I had a question about our next meeting, which is, we had talked about potentially doing deliberations in person versus over Zoom. I'm open to either. I know, Ralph, you had a preference for in person. Chris, Chris has a preference for in person since he hasn't spent much quality time with all of us.
It was great to meet Rolf and Francine last week in
Yeah.
person for the first time.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it if everybody wants to do it that way.
yeah,
Yeah, let's do it in person.
in person. So Michelle can find us some space, hopefully not the basement. Please,
Yeah.
not the
No,
basement.
because I'm like allergic to the basement.
I
I spent
know.
many years down there.
Yeah, well, it'd be good to have
Allergy
somewhere
meds.
with a big presentation board too, right? So we can share stuff and live add stuff up. So
Yeah.
if we got a Zoom thing, whatever we have, we need a screen. So
Yeah.
figure that out.
Okay. Well, if we can swing someplace like Wilcott, great. But if not, the basement we go.
It
Okay.
must be a library room. The library doesn't close till 8, so we may be able to, maybe if we do like a 6:30.
Yeah, okay. Well, you let us know what our, you make an executive decision around what our best option is.
Can do.
Awesome. And I think the only other thing I had was like water and sewer. It sounds like it doesn't really matter when they come, but at some point they've got to come.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll let's Susan and I will kind of bang on that drum a little bit because they're gonna, yeah.
I get the sewer agendas, because I follow them from a development and zoning perspective, and I haven't seen them talking about capital items recently, so I don't know where they are. I don't follow water, so I don't know if they've been discussing. So it's definitely worth like finding out whether they've even talked about their capital plan, because I haven't seen it on sewer's agenda recently.
Yeah, I'll reach out to the chair and see what's going on.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anything that we need specifically for next week? I feel like we've got, outside of minutes, I don't know if there's any more materials besides what the schools are gonna send along in terms of leasing information. I feel like we have everything else.
We've got a big pile of stuff. I think I mean, really, I've been impressed with the amount of data and information and detail that we've gotten from people this cycle. We really have a full stack of stuff. I mean, I remember last year there were whole giant gaps, right? That we were kind of trying to weed our way through at the last second. So yeah, it'll be nice to kind of have everything, have us all in one place with all the documentation. I think that'll make our jobs a lot easier to just go through it line by line. So.
Also, I think the critical thing for these kinds of final discussions is prioritization. So what I think you need to know is, what do the departments want for prioritization? So it should be, their preference should be showing somewhere. I know we've got our spreadsheet, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what their prioritization is. So we should know.
We can go through some of our notes. I think we did ask a lot about prioritization. I think the schools on their presentations actually had them prioritized. Whether that's changed, I don't know, since their recent discussions.
I'm happy to go back to the schools this week and we can add a column into the tracking spreadsheet that just has, deprioritization. We can do like a numbering system for
Okay.
each of the departments.
Mhm.
We have DPWs, fire, there's only one item.
Why don't we do a first draft of our policy? Because I don't want to also push back and give people, A, make them do too much work, or B, give them a sensation that there's more money than there is. Like if we do a first pass and we find that actually we're pretty comfortable, we don't necessarily need people to kind of go through and make their own calls, maybe.
Okay.
I think we'll be okay. There'll be some that drop off, but I think we're gonna have a pretty good sense of what we can fit and what we can't.
Okay.
I mean, that's just kind of how I feel now, just kind of with everything in my head right now. It's like, I think we've got, I've got the things that are pretty secure, pretty big, pretty understandable. And then the things that are kind of like, okay, nice, but maybe not. But then I also haven't done the math to see exactly how much money we have, right? We just lost some money because of the roof got reclassified, but then we gained some money because we're not doing any cash expenditures for town hall. So I'm not exact.
Yeah, Katie did some of that updating.
Yeah, on the roll forward, I still think we're at a budget of 2.1 million. And that gets us to an ending balance of 1 million.
Yeah.
So
I haven't checked your math on this one yet, but yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I
yeah,
took out the 163, I adjusted the interest.
Mhm.
And you're adding in total requests minus, okay, 1908. So we've got 1908 right now live for requests out of the capital stabilization budget based on
Yes.
this number.
Yes.
Okay. Plus the little changes to DPW, which you're doing live here. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, largely right now, it looks like we can fit in, most of what, most things anyway. So even if we had a prioritization, I'm not sure it would change what we do. I think part of having all these liaison conversations, I think a lot of the prioritization and decidings of whether these were real or not kind of already happened, right? I know for schools, like we went through this for maybe 4 times through and started to understand more and more what's real, what's not. And, these have already been, as opposed to hearing everything and then as the committee going through them, I think a lot of the stuff's already been whittled down quite a bit.
I mean, the schools went from over 1 million to 800 to 600, and the full committee sort of heard the 600 versus heard the original over $1 million. So
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think again we're going to deliberate, but I think the list that we've got now is pretty strong. For what I think we still have obviously some unknowns, but it's not like we're trying to fit in. We have a little bit of elbow room right now, which is good.
Mhm.
okay.
Right.
So I'll take on just touching base with the school on the leases, and I'll also try and pin down Brian around the Pond Street sidewalk extension. Again, that's sort of up to the schools to also pin down, but I feel like that's probably the one with the least amount of costing against it right now.
Yep.
And everything else is pretty firm.
Yeah, that one may go up another 50 grand, right? So yeah, that hopefully not. Good.
Yeah. Okay.
It is on line 63 on your spreadsheet, is that in 2 columns or is that split? See how you have the camera project?
It's split. Yeah. So I don't know if
Okay.
Well, so they said that they were going to do just high priority things, and
But I think
there's a lot
that's,
more out there. But
I'll go back and double check that.
yeah, because it's being the same number is a little weird. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so yeah, we'll tighten this up for the next meeting. That'll be very helpful. Maybe Michelle will have some insight if she's feeling better.
Yep,
Something's going around. Yeah.
Oh, wow, everybody's
and
sick.
back around.
I know. Well, I know that school vacation week used to be to kind of stop the spread of things, but all that happens is people go get sick other places and bring it back to class. So I'm not quite sure this is working as a concept.
Yeah,
True.
yeah, okay.
All right, I'll look through my notes, Katie. If I see anything that's, definitive about ranking, I'll let you
Yeah.
know.
Okay,
We might want to also ping Nick to see if there's any more updates on Paul Pratt, because I thought that $40,000 number was a pretty guesstimate number.
On the
Um,
facade repair?
Am I remembering that? Yeah, the facade repairs. Yeah.
no,
Oh, it's engineering. Okay. Gotcha.
no, it's based on an engineering report.
Okay.
I think we asked them that question when we were speaking with them. Did they anticipate finding something, lurking behind the bricks that was, going to make the project much more costly? And he did not feel that there would be.
Yeah. I think part of it was he had a number for the total, and then he had sort of divided it up by sort of side or project, and he did feel comfortable with that 40,000. But you're right, there wasn't a quote behind that, Corey, but I think Susan's right that we had probed him
Okay.
on that.
All right. We're going to do this next week, so we don't have to have the
Yeah.
meeting before the
Okay.
meeting. So my apologies. It just I had a spreadsheet in front of me. I started reading it. So
Yeah.
Curious mind.
Yes.
8:53. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Unless there's something
second.
else. All right.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, everybody. We'll see
Thank
you
All
you.
right,
again.
thanks. All right, see you everybody.
Thanks,
in-
everybody.
Have a good
right.
night.
All right, bye.